Translate this, he sneered, like I was some kind of performing dog. Her knuckles cracked white, gripping the notepad. Years spent bearing the past, and now this titan of tech thought he could just unearth it? Arrogant prick. He had no clue who he was talking to, did he? This wasn't just a waitress he was belittling. This was Elena Vance, formerly of the UN, fluent in ways he couldn't even dream. A dangerous woman to provoke. But Thorne, blinded by his billions, saw only an insignificant server. What he didn't know? Her quiet act of grace, a forgotten kindness to someone with ties to Thorne's rival, would ignite a war he never saw coming. A war where words are the weapons. In a moment of pure arrogance, he tried to humiliate her in a language he was sure she wouldn't understand. He looked down on her and sneered, "Translate to this." He never expected that this quiet waitress would not only understand, but would use her voice to bring his entire world crashing down. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a restaurant. It was a stage perched atop a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city's pulsing veins of light. The patrons were the kind of people who didn't look at price tags, whose conversations could shift global markets, and whose very presence was a testament to their success. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil, expensive perfume, and ambition, and moving through it all like a ghost was Elena. To the untrained eye, Elena was just part of the scenery. Her uniform, a crisp black blouse and tailored trousers, was immaculate, her movements economical and precise. She refilled water glasses before they were empty, cleared plates with silent efficiency, and maintained a placid, neutral expression that revealed nothing. At 28, she had a quiet grace that some mistook for timidity. Her colleagues saw her as reliable but distant a woman who did her job flawlessly and then vanished back into the city's anonymity. They knew nothing of the life she lived before this, of the world. She had deliberately escaped. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with a particular energy. The staff had been briefed that morning. Ronald Thorne was coming. The name alone was enough to put everyone on edge. Thorne, the 35-year-old CEO of Titan Industries, was a legend in the tech world. He was a self-made billionaire, a ruthless innovator, and a man known for his towering intellect and an ego to match. He treated the world as his personal chessboard, and he despised incompetence in any form. Stories of his tirades were legendary. Waiters fired for a misplaced fork, executives humiliated for a minor stutter during a presentation. When he arrived, it was with the force of a minor weather event. He wasn't loud, but the atmosphere shifted around him. He was flanked by two associates, a stern-looking German man named Klaus Richa and a suave, silver-haired Italian Marco Bellini. They were in the final stages of a hostile takeover of a major European energy conglomerate, a deal worth billions. The Gilded Spoon was the chosen ground for their victory dinner, a place to gloat before the ink was even dry. Ronald Thorne was handsome in a severe sculpted way. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His suit was a custom-made armor of dark gray silk, and his eyes a startling icy blue. Missed nothing. They swept across the room with a look of bored appraisal, dismissing everything and everyone as beneath him. He didn't walk. He strode a predator in his natural habitat. Their table, the best in the house, was in Elena's section. Her manager, a perpetually nervous man named Robert, had assigned it to her because he knew she wouldn't crumble. "Just keep your head down, Elena," he had whispered, his hands fluttering nervously. "Don't speak unless spoken to." Thorne likes his servers invisible. Elena had simply nodded. Invisibility was her specialty. She approached the table, her notepad in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you something to drink to start?" Her voice was low and steady, a calm island in the sea of nervous energy. Ronald didn't even look at her. He was speaking to Klaus in rapid guttural German, dissecting a floor in their competitor's latest financial report. Marco interjected in smooth-flowing Italian, gesturing with his hands as he made a point about market perception. The conversation was a multilingual fortress designed to exclude outsiders. It was a power play, a way of reinforcing their own elite club. Elena stood patiently, her gaze fixed on a point just over Ronald's shoulder. She understood every word. She understood the German analysis of debt-to-equity ratios, the Italian commentary on media spin, and the subtle shifts in tone that revealed the true dynamics between the three men. Klaus was the cautious strategist, Marco, the charismatic closer, and Ronald. Ronald was the unassailable king. He finally acknowledged her existence by waving a dismissive hand. The 98 chat Margot, a bottle don't take all night. He said it in English, but it was clipped impatient, meant for a servant. An excellent choice, sir, Elena replied, her voice even. She turned to leave, but Ronald's next words stopped her. He turned to Marco, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, and said in perfect French, "It's amusing, isn't it? The little people who scurry around us, they live their entire lives in this one city, speaking this one language with no idea of the real world, the world we shape." Marco chuckled, a rich, appreciative sound. "They serve their purpose, Ronald. They pour the wine." Elena's back was to them. For a fraction of a second, her posture stiffened. Her knuckles gripping the small notepad turned white. She had spent years building a wall around her past brick by painstaking brick. She had learned to be a blank slate, to absorb insults and condescension, like a sponge, to let nothing touch the person she kept locked away inside. But Ronald Thorne's casual, dismissive cruelty felt like a chisel chipping away at that wall. He had no idea who he was talking to. He saw a waitress, a uniform, a function. He didn't see the woman who had once advised ambassadors, who had whispered translations into the ears of world leaders, who had lived and breathed the very world he believed he owned. She took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing her hand to relax. She turned back to the table, a mask of professional calm perfectly in place. She met Ronald's gaze for the first time. His blue eyes held a flicker of surprise, as if he hadn't expected the scenery to look back. "The Shadow Margot 98, she confirmed, her voice betraying no emotion. "I will bring it right away." As she walked toward the wine cellar, she could feel his eyes on her back. It was a cold, analytical stare. The game had not yet begun, but Ronald Thorne, a man who prided himself on seeing every angle, had just made his first critical miscalculation. He had failed to see the person right in front of him. The bottle of Chateau Margaux was presented with the reverence of a holy relic. Elena handled it with an expert's touch, her movements fluid and economical. She showed the label to Ronald, who gave a cursory, impatient nod. The pop of the cork was a soft sigh, barely audible, over the restaurant's sophisticated murmur. She poured a small amount into his glass for him to taste. Ronald swirled the deep red liquid, his expression one of intense, almost arrogant concentration. He wasn't just tasting wine, he was passing judgment. He brought the glass to his lips, let the wine sit on his palate, and finally gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Elena proceeded to pour for Klaus and Marco before filling Ronald's glass and placing the bottle on the table. Through it all, she remained a silent, efficient presence. But her silence was beginning to unnerve Ronald. He was used to two reactions from service staff, fawning obsequiousness or nervous fear. Elena projected neither. She was simply present. Her calmness felt less like deference and more like a quiet, unshakable confidence. It was as if she were operating in a different reality, one where his billions and his reputation held no weight. It was irritating. It was a puzzle, and Ronald Thorne loathed puzzles he couldn't immediately solve. The conversation at the table resumed its trilingual flow. They spoke of leveraged buyouts in German, of political connections in Rome, in Italian, and of media strategies in French. It was a deliberate display of cosmopolitan power, a clear signal to anyone with an earshot that they were men who operated on a global stage. They ordered their food exorbitantly priced delicacies, and Elena took the order without flinching, her pen gliding across the notepad. "The lady is very composed," Marco noted in Italian, a hint of amusement in his voice as Elena walked away to place their order. "She's a robot," Ronald countered in the same language. "Probably doesn't have two thoughts to rub together beyond steak temperatures." He took a sip of his wine. "It's what you want in a servant. No personality, no complications." Yet he kept watching her. He watched how she navigated the crowded room, how she anticipated the needs of other diners, how she interacted with the busboys with a quiet word and a nod of thanks. There was an intelligence in her efficiency that contradicted his robot theory. It was in the small things, the way she adjusted a crooked fork on an adjacent table without breaking stride, The faint, almost invisible smile she gave an elderly couple celebrating their anniversary. She was observing everything. Their appetizers arrived, seared scallops for Marco, steak tartare for Klaus, and a ludicrously expensive dollop of caviar for Ronald. Elena served them with practiced ease. As she placed the caviar in front of him, Ronald decided to test her. He looked directly at her, his blue eyes cold and challenging, speaking in fluent Russian, a language he had mastered for its strategic importance in the energy sector. He said the service here is glacially slow. One might think they are waiting for the ice to melt in Siberia. It was a pointed, unnecessary insult. Klaus and Marco exchanged a quick glance. Ronald was toying with her, now using his linguistic arsenal to fire shots he knew she couldn't possibly understand. It was cruel, but it was typical Ronald. Elena didn't react. Her expression remained serenely neutral. She simply placed the mother-of-pearl spoon beside the dish and said in perfectly clear English, "Enjoy your appetizer, sir." Her lack of response was more infuriating to Ronald than any argument would have been. He had expected a flicker of confusion, a nervous apology, anything to confirm his superiority. Instead, he got nothing. Just that unnerving calm. It was like punching water. He turned his attention back to his companions, but his focus was fractured. Half of his mind was on the multi-billion-dollar deal. The other half was now inexplicably fixated on the quiet waitress. Who was she? Why wasn't she intimidated? The main courses arrived, a perfectly cooked filet mignon for Ronald Ubico for Marco, and a hearty sauerbraten for Luce. As Elena served, Ronald ramped up his campaign of subtle psychological warfare. He would ask Marco a question in Italian, then immediately turn to Klaus and make a counterpoint in German, forcing Elena to constantly navigate the physical space around their linguistic bubble. He moved his wine glass just as she was about to refill it. He dropped his napkin and watched as she bent to retrieve it without a word. Each act was a small assertion of dominance, a reminder of her station and his, and each time she met his petty provocations with the same impenetrable poise. She was a fortress of professional decorum, and he couldn't find a single crack. His frustration was mounting, simmering beneath his cool exterior. He wasn't just a billionaire, he was Ronald Thorne. People reacted to him. They feared him. They admired him. They hated him. But they reacted. This woman's placid indifference felt like a personal affront. It was a denial of his power, a quiet rejection of the entire world he had built. He looked at her as she refilled his water glass. He saw the simple, clean lines of her face, the dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, the complete absence of makeup or jewelry, save for a simple, worn-looking watch on her wrist. She was deliberately plain, deliberately forgettable, and yet she had become the most unforgettable person in the room. The main course was nearly finished. Ronald knew he had one final card to play. He wasn't just going to test her anymore. He was going to break her. He would force a reaction. He would make her see who he was and who she was. He leaned back in his chair, catching her eye as she approached to clear a plate. The smirk returned to his face, sharper and crueler this time. He had formulated the perfect challenge, a complex piece of financial jargon wrapped in a language he was certain no waitress in New York could possibly comprehend. He let the silence stretch for a moment, drawing the attention of his associates and even the couple at the next table. The stage was set. With all the arrogance he could muster, he pointed his fork at her and prepared to deliver the line that would finally shatter her composure. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. Every eye at the table was on Elena. Klaus looked uncomfortable, a man who appreciated order, and saw this as a needless, messy deviation. Marco watched with the detached curiosity of a spectator at a gladiatorial match. Ronald, however, was fully invested. This was no longer about dinner. It was about reaffirming the natural order of his universe. He fixed his cold blue eyes on Elena. He had chosen his words carefully, selecting a phrase from the most technical part of their ongoing negotiation, a phrase designed to be dense, obscure, and utterly untranslatable for a layperson. He delivered it in a crisp, authoritative Russian, the language of oil barons and spies, a language he wielded like a weapon. "Tell my associate," he began, gesturing vaguely towards Klaus, that the amortized debentures are contingent upon the successful leveraging of our subsidiary's derivative assets, pending regulatory approval from the Commission. He paused, letting the complex financial terminology hang in the air like toxic smoke. Then, with a sneer that dripped with condescension, he added the final dismissive command in English. Translate this. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a challenge, a public humiliation, and an execution à la nonne. He leaned back, a triumphant glint in his eye, ready to watch her stammer, blush, and apologize for her inadequacy. He expected her to crumble, to finally show the fear and deference he commanded. Elena didn't move. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her dark eyes locked on his. The restaurant, with its clinking glasses and muted conversations, seemed a world away. There was no fear in her gaze, there was no confusion. There was only a profound, unsettling stillness. It felt as if a mask was slowly being lowered, revealing something ancient and formidable beneath. When she finally spoke, her voice was not the quiet, deferential tone of a waitress. It was clear, measured, and carried an authority that stunned the table into deeper silence. First, she turned to the visibly bewildered Klaus Rische in flawless, accent-free German. She said, "He says that the amortization of the bonds depends on the successful use of the derivative assets of our subsidiary, which in turn depends on the approval of the Commission." Klaus's jaw literally dropped. He stared at her, then at Ronald, then back at her, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Elena then turned her gaze back to Ronald. The placid neutrality was gone, replaced by a cool, razor-sharp focus. She switched back to a perfect enunciated English for his benefit. "That is what you said," she stated, her voice even. "However, what I believe you meant to say in Russian, if you wanted to be precise, involved a different grammatical case. You used the genitive case for approval, when the instrumental case would have been more appropriate to convey the concept of pending or conditional upon, a small error, but one that could be misinterpreted as the deal being an existing consequence of approval rather than a future possibility dependent on it." She let the correction settle in the silent air. It was a verbal scalpel wielded with surgical precision. She hadn't just translated his words. She had dissected them, corrected them, and handed them back to him, stripped of all their intended power. She wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, her eyes never leaving his, referring to them as debentures. In this context is slightly misleading. Given the unsecured nature of the debt instruments you've been discussing, I overheard your earlier conversation. Unsecured notes would be a more accurate financial term. It matters in international finance. Precision matters. The silence was no longer just silence. It was a vacuum. Ronald Thorne, the titan of industry, the master of languages, the man who prided himself on his intellectual superiority, had just been publicly and comprehensively outmaneuvered by a waitress. He was staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief. The smirk was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. This was no robot. This was no simple servant. Marco Bellini was the first to break the spell. He let out a low whistle, a mixture of shock and genuine admiration. He looked at Elena as if seeing her for the first time. Klaus was still speechless, shaking his head slightly as if to clear it. The sound of a fork clattering onto a plate from a nearby table broke the tension. Everyone had been listening. The manager, Robert, was hovering near the kitchen door, his face pale with terror and awe. Elena's professional mask slipped back into place, but it looked different now. What once seemed like meekness was now clearly immense control. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Will there be anything else, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice returning to its quiet professional tone, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of their dinner. Ronald couldn't speak. For the first time in his adult life, he was utterly, completely speechless. He had intended to expose her as insignificant. Instead, she had exposed him. She had revealed his arrogance, his sloppiness, and his profound ignorance about the person standing right in front of him. He felt a hot, unfamiliar flush of shame creep up his neck. It was quickly followed by a tidal wave of cold fury. Who in the hell was this woman? The rest of the dinner was a tense, silent affair. The air at the table was thick with unspoken questions. Klaus and Marco ate their desserts with a newfound, almost comical politeness, occasionally stealing glances at Elena, as if she might suddenly start levitating. They directed all their questions, however mundane, to a different waiter. They were terrified of her, but also deeply intrigued. Ronald didn't touch his dessert. He sat in simmering silence, his mind racing. Every theory he had about her had been vaporized. The quiet waitress was a phantom, a riddle wrapped in a black uniform. The precision of her language, the depth of her financial knowledge. It wasn't something you picked up in night school. It was the mark of a highly trained world-class professional. So what was she doing here, serving him caviar? He paid the bill without a word. The tip he left was obscenely large, not out of generosity, but as a desperate, clumsy attempt to reassert his power to reduce their entire exchange back to a simple financial transaction. As he and his partners left, he paused at the door and looked back. Elena was clearing their table, her movements as calm and efficient as ever. She didn't look at him. To her, it seemed he was already gone. The thought was maddening. The next morning, Ronald Thorne did what he did best. When faced with a problem he couldn't solve, he threw resources at it. He made a call to his head of security, a former Mossad agent named David Chen. The instructions were simple and absolute. Last night I was at the Gilded Spoon. Our server was a woman named Elena. I want to know everything about her, her full name, where she was born, where she went to school, what she ate for breakfast, everything, and I want it by now. David, a man accustomed to tracking corporate spies and rogue programmers, was slightly abused by the request, but knew better than to question it. "Consider it done," he said. While David's team got to work, Elena woke up in her small, sparsely furnished apartment in a quiet, unassuming part of Brooklyn. The contrast with the Gilded Spoon could not have been more stark. There was no glamour here, only functionality. The walls were lined with books, not novels, but dense texts on linguistics, history, and international law in a dozen different languages. Her morning routine was a quiet ritual. Yoga tea and then 2 hours of study. She wasn't just maintaining her languages, she was sharpening them. She read articles from Leon de Spiegel and Pravda, keeping abreast of the world she had left behind. It was a form of self-flagellation, a way of never forgetting what she had lost. Her name was Elena Vance, and 5 years ago, she hadn't been a waitress. She had been one of the most promising young translators at the United Nations in Geneva, a prodigy who had mastered 9 languages. By the age of 25, she was the go-to interpreter for the most sensitive and high-stakes diplomatic meetings. She moved in the circles of power. Ronald Thorne could only dream of a world not of money, but of secrets, treaties, and the fragile architecture of global peace. Her life had been a whirlwind of silent boos, earpieces, and the immense pressure of knowing that a single misplaced word could ignite an international incident. She had thrived on it. Then came the incident. It was a closed-door negotiation between 2 warring nations over a disputed border. The tension was suffocating. Elena was in the booth translating for the special envoy, a man she respected, Ambassador Sterling. The details were seared into her memory. The angry shouting tirades of one minister, the cold, calculating threats of the other. Her job was to be a perfect conduit to convey the meaning without the emotion. But in a critical moment, the aggressor minister made a veiled threat against the ambassador's family using a rare specific regional dialect. It was a nuance, a subtlety that a lesser interpreter might have missed. Elena, however, understood it perfectly. Protocol dictated she translate it exactly as it was said, but in a split-second human decision, she tried to soften it, to rephrase it in a way that would de-escalate the situation without losing the core threat. She thought she was preventing a disaster. She caused one instead. Her slight alteration was perceived not as a de-escalation, but as a weakness, a sign that the ambassador's side was wavering. The aggressor minister seized the opportunity, stormed out of the negotiations, and launched a military offensive within hours. The peace talks collapsed. People died. Ambassador Sterling was ruined his career over, and while no formal blame was ever attached to Elena, the whispers followed her. She was the translator who broke, the one who let her own judgment interfere. The weight of her failure was crushing. She had tried to play God with words, and the consequences were written in blood. She resigned, left Geneva, changed her name, and vanished, seeking anonymity in the one place she felt she could truly be invisible. A waitress in the bustling chaos of New York City, she had sentenced herself to a life of penance, a silent observer in a world she was no longer fit to participate in. Back in his penthouse office at precisely 11:45 a.m., Ronald Thorne opened the encrypted file David Chen had sent him. The subject line read, Elena Vance. He read through the report, his icy blue eyes widening with every line. He saw the prestigious education Oxford summa cum laude in modern languages. He saw the stellar career at the UN. He saw the glowing recommendations from ambassadors and diplomats. And then he saw the final heavily redacted section on the failed peace talks. The sudden resignation, the disappearance. The pieces clicked into place. The poise, the languages, the cool correction of his grammar. It all made sense. He wasn't dealing with a waitress. He was dealing with a ghost from a world far more complex and dangerous than his own. His anger from the previous night was replaced by a different, more complex emotion. It was a strange cocktail of respect, fascination, and a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. He had tried to humiliate a fallen queen, blissfully unaware of the crown she had once worn. He leaned back in his leather chair, the city spread out beneath him. The game had just changed. This wasn't about a bruised ego anymore. He looked at the details of the energy deal he was trying to close, the very deal he had been celebrating. The final negotiation was in 3 days. The key player on the other side, the man who held the final vote, was a notoriously difficult Russian oligarch, a man who had been a shadowy advisor to one of the parties in those same failed peace talks 5 years ago. A man who valued precision and nuance above all else. A slow, predatory smile spread across Ronald Thorne's face. He hadn't just found a puzzle. He had found a key. The discovery of Elena's past reshaped Ronald's entire strategy. The upcoming negotiation with the Russian oligarch Mikhail Vulov was the final, most precarious piece of his takeover bid. Volkov was an old-school player, a man who distrusted corporate jargon and valued subtle face-to-face communication. He was known for conducting the most critical parts of his business in his native Russian, often using obscure idioms and cultural references to test his opponents. Ronald's own Russian was excellent, but Elena's was different. It was native-level nuanced and backed by a deep understanding of diplomatic subtext. She was a strategic asset of immense value. But how to approach her? His arrogant display at the restaurant had burned that bridge. He couldn't just offer her a job. She would laugh in his face. He needed leverage, a way in. He tasked David Chen with a new mission. Find out everything about Elena's current life, her routine, her friends, her financial situation. He needed to understand what she wanted, or more importantly, what she needed. Meanwhile, news of the incident at the Gilded Spoon had begun to ripple through the city's elite circles. Marco Bellini, a born gossip, had recounted the story with dramatic flair to a few select friends. It was too delicious a tale to keep quiet. Ronald Thorne, the great white shark of the corporate world, being schooled on Russian grammar by his waitress. The story eventually reached the ears of the one person Ronald would have paid millions to keep it from, Victoria Sterling. Victoria was the CEO of Sterling Conglomerates, his chief rival in the energy deal. She was as brilliant and ruthless as Ronald. But where he was a sledgehammer, she was a stiletto. She was whip-smart, elegant, and possessed a network of informants that would make the CIA blush. She saw every interaction as a transaction, every person a potential asset or liability. And she was the daughter of Ambassador Sterling, the very man whose career had been destroyed in the diplomatic incident that ended Elena's. Victoria blamed the faceless, anonymous translator for her father's downfall as much as anyone, even if she never knew her name. When she heard the story about Ronald and the mysterious waitress, her instincts went on high alert. A waitress with that level of linguistic and financial acumen was not just a waitress, it was an anomaly. And in Victoria's world, anomalies were opportunities. She dispatched her own people to investigate. Being more subtle than Ronald, her team didn't just pull data. They conducted quiet on-the-ground reconnaissance. Within a day, they had a name, the one Elena used now, and a photograph. Victoria's plan was simple and cruel. She would find this woman and use her. Perhaps she could be bribed to feed them information about Ronald. Or maybe if she was desperate, she could be hired away, depriving Ronald of whatever strange interest he had in her. At the very least, she could be used to publicly embarrass him further. Elena remained blissfully unaware of the powerful forces now converging on her quiet life. Her shift after the dinner with Ronald had been uneventful. Her manager, Robert, had treated her with a new, terrified reverence. But her colleagues, sensing a shift in the power dynamic, kept their distance. For Elena, this was a relief. All she wanted was to be left alone to serve her penance in peace. A few days later, as Elena was leaving her apartment for her shift, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The tinted rear window glided down, revealing a perfectly coiffed, impeccably dressed woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. "Elena," the woman said. Her voice was smooth as silk, but held an undertone of steel. "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'd like a word with you." Elena froze. The name Sterling hit her like a physical blow. Ambassador Sterling's daughter. A ghost from the past she had worked so hard to bury was now sitting in a car outside her front door. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. "I think you have the wrong person." Elena managed her voice tight. She turned to walk away. "I don't," Victoria called after her. "I know who you are. I know about Geneva. I know everything." Elena stopped her back rigid. The past had not just caught up with her, it had ambushed her. She turned slowly, her face pale, but her expression carefully guarded. "What do you want?" "Get in the car," Victoria said, her tone, leaving no room for argument. "We have a lot to discuss. For instance, how the woman partially responsible for my father's ruin is now serving canapes to the man I'm about to destroy in a business deal. It's a small world, isn't it?" The threat was clear. Victoria knew her secret, the one thing that could still destroy her. She had no choice. With a feeling of profound dread, Elena opened the door and got into the car. The plush leather interior felt like a cage. The car moved silently through the city streets. Victoria watched Elena with a predatory calm. "Ronald Thorne is interested in you," Victoria began, getting straight to the point. "I want to know why. More than that, I want your help. You clearly have skills that are being wasted. I'm prepared to offer you a position at my company, a senior analyst role. The salary would be 10 times what you make now. All I ask for in return is a little insight into Mr. Thorne and your loyalty." It was a tempting offer on the surface, a way out of her self-imposed exile, a return to a life of intellectual challenge and financial security. But Elena saw the trap immediately. Victoria wasn't offering a job. She was buying a weapon to be aimed at Ronald Thorne, and a way to hold Elena's past over her forever. "I'm not interested," Elena said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm a waitress, that's all." Victoria laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Don't be naive. That life is over. I found you. Ronald is looking for you. The bubble you've been living in has burst. You can either be a player on the board or a pawn to be sacrificed. I'm offering you a chance to be a player. If you refuse, I can make things very difficult for you. A quiet word in the right ear is all it would take to make sure you can't even get a job washing dishes in this city. I know what happened in Geneva. I can make everyone else know too." This was the moment Elena had dreaded for 5 years. Her carefully constructed anonymity was shattering around her. She was being backed into a corner by the daughter of the man. She felt she had failed so profoundly. But as she looked at Victoria's merciless face, something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, but it was joined by a spark of the defiance she thought had died in Geneva. She had spent 5 years punishing herself. She would not let Victoria Sterling use her past to blackmail her. "I am not for sale," Elena said, her voice low and steady, "and I am not your pawn. Stop the car. I'm getting out." Victoria stared at her, genuinely surprised by the resistance. "You're making a terrible mistake." "The only mistake," Elena replied, meeting her gaze without flinching, "was getting in this car." After a tense standoff, Victoria signaled her driver. The car pulled over. As Elena stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, Victoria's final words followed her. "You'll regret this. When Ronald Thorne is done with you, you'll come crawling back to me, but it will be too late." Elena didn't look back. She walked away, her heart hammering in her chest, the weight of her past now heavier than ever. She had escaped one cage, but she knew with a sinking feeling that she was walking right into another. Because just a block away, sitting in an unremarkable sedan, one of David Chen's surveillance agents was taking pictures and documenting the entire meeting. Ronald Thorne would know about Victoria's move within the hour. The board was set and the pawns were finally in motion. The report landed on Ronald's desk less than 30 minutes after Elena stepped out of Victoria's car. It was concise and devastating high-resolution photos of Elena and Victoria together, audio surveillance of their entire conversation, and a full profile of Victoria Sterling, including her relationship to the late ambassador. Ronald stared at the transcript, reading the conversation over and over. Victoria's brutal blackmail attempt, Elena's quiet, steely refusal. "I am not for sale. I am not your porn." The words echoed in his mind. He had seen her composure in the restaurant. But this was different. This was courage. She had faced the ghost of her past, embodied by the daughter of the man she had inadvertently ruined, and she hadn't broken. A cold, unfamiliar feeling washed over him. He had intended to use her to leverage her skills for his own gain. He saw her as a tool, a superior one, but a tool nonetheless. But seeing Victoria try the same thing in such a cruel and personal way disgusted him. It was a mirror held up to his own intentions, and he didn't like the reflection. For the first time, he saw Elena not as an asset, but as a person who had suffered immensely and was now being hunted by predators. Predators like Victoria, predators like him. He canned his afternoon meetings. He needed to think. His original plan to find some leverage and force her to work for him now felt crude and insufficient. It was Victoria's strategy, and he was better than that. He needed a new approach, one built not on coercion, but on something else, something he wasn't accustomed to using respect. He now understood the full context of the upcoming negotiation. It wasn't just a business meeting with Mikhail Vulov. It was a convergence of fates. Volkov had been in the orbit of the Geneva talks. Victoria, the ambassador's daughter, was his rival, and Elena, the disgraced interpreter, was the key that connected them all. The deal was no longer just about money. It was about history, redemption, and revenge, and he was standing right in the middle of it. That evening, Elena felt a profound sense of dread. She called in sick to the restaurant, unable to face the bright lights and fake smiles. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Victoria's threat hung over her, a promise to weaponize her past and destroy the fragile peace she had built. She paced her small apartment, feeling the walls close in. Her self-imposed prison had been breached, and she didn't know where to run. A sharp knock on her door made her jump. Her heart pounded. Was it Victoria back to make good on her threat? She cautiously approached the door, peering through the peephole. It was Ronald Thorne. He was alone. No associates, no driver, no entourage. He was dressed not in a power suit, but in dark jeans and a simple, well-fitted black sweater. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like an ordinary man. An ordinary, incredibly intense man. Hesitantly, she opened the door, leaving the security chain in place. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice weary. "May I come in?" "Mance," he asked. He used her real name. The sound of it was a jolt. "I promise I'm not here to cause trouble." His tone was different from the one in the restaurant. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet seriousness. She saw something in his eyes, not pity, but a flicker of understanding. Against her better judgment, she slid the chain off and opened the door. He stepped inside his large frame, seeming to shrink the small apartment. His eyes took in the room, the Spartan furniture, the towering stacks of books in multiple languages. He looked at the wall of texts and nodded slowly as if confirming something to himself. "I know what happened today," he began, not wasting any time. With Victoria Sterling, Elena's blood ran cold. "You had me followed. It wasn't a question." "Yes," he admitted without hesitation. "And I know who she is. I know who her father was. And I know about your connection to the Geneva talks. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, a defensive posture. If you're here to offer me a job like she did, you can save your breath. I'm not interested in being a corporates or a pawn in your war with the steerings. I know you're not, Ronald said. He took a step closer, his gaze direct and unwavering. I'm not here to offer you a job. I'm here to offer you a chance to close a door you've been unable to shut for years. He paused, letting his words sink in. The man I'm meeting in 2 days, Mikhail Vulov, was the primary advisor to the minister you negotiated with in Geneva. He was in the room when the talks collapsed. He knows what really happened. He knows about the threat that was made the nuance you tried to navigate. Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. Vulov, the name was familiar, a shadowy figure from that nightmare. Victoria wants this deal to fail. Ronald continued, his voice low and intense. Not just for the money, but for revenge. She blames you for her father's downfall. If I lose, she wins. And she will use her victory to crush you, to make sure the world knows your story and paints you as the villain. She will destroy what's left of your life out of pure spite. He was laying all the cards on the table. It was a brutal, terrifying truth. What do you want from me? Elena whispered, her voice barely audible. I want you in that meeting, he said. Not behind me, not as a subordinate beside me. As my partner, I need an interpreter. Yes, but I need more than that. I need someone who understands the history in that room. Someone who can read the subtext that I can't. Vulov will be testing me using the past as a weapon. With you there, we can turn that weapon back on him. You can translate not just his words, but his intentions. He took another step closer. This isn't about my deal anymore, Elena. It's about your story. Victoria is going to tell it one way. This is your chance to tell it your way, to face the man who was there to use the skills that cost you everything to finally reclaim your life. Help me, and you'll not only save this deal, you'll save yourself. You can walk away from that room with your head held high. The ghost of Geneva finally laid to rest. The offer was audacious, terrifying, and utterly brilliant. He wasn't offering her money or a title. He was offering her something far more valuable, a path to redemption. He was giving her a chance to rewrite the ending of her own tragic story. Tears welled in Elena's eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, aching release. For 5 years, she had been running. For 5 years, she had been punishing herself. Ronald Thorne, the arrogant billionaire she had despised, was now offering her the one thing she never thought she would have again, a chance to fight back. She looked at him, truly seeing him for the first time. The ruthless CEO was still there, but beneath it was a brilliant strategist who understood not just power, but people. He had read her perfectly. I'll do it, she said, her voice shaking but resolute. But on one condition, name it. I'm not your partner, she said, her voice gaining strength. I'm not your employee. For that one meeting, I am your equal. You listen to my counsel. You follow my lead on the linguistic and cultural cues. No questions asked. We do this my way. A slow smile spread across Ronald's face. It was not the cruel smirk from the restaurant, but a smile of genuine respect. Miss Vance, he said, it would be an honor. The 2 days leading up to the negotiation were a whirlwind of intense preparation. Ronald's penthouse became their command center. Financial projections and market analyses were spread across a vast mahogany table. But the real work was happening between him and Elena. For the first time, Ronald allowed someone else to take the lead. Elena drilled him relentlessly, not on the numbers, he knew those cold, but on the nuances of Russian business culture. She taught him about the importance of history, poetry, and metaphor in their conversations. She explained how Vulov would use long, seemingly irrelevant anecdotes to test his patience and gauge his character. He's not just buying a company, she explained, her voice crisp and authoritative. He's assessing the man who will control it. He needs to know if you are a mere merchant or a man of substance. Ronald listened, absorbing everything. He saw the UN-level strategist emerge from the shell of the Waitress. She was brilliant, intuitive, and completely in her element. The dynamic between them had shifted entirely. He was no longer the billionaire and the server. They were two high-level strategists preparing for battle. A strange, powerful respect grew between them. He found himself not just admiring her intellect, but trusting her instincts implicitly. The day of the meeting arrived. It was held in a private suite at the Four Seasons, a neutral ground. The room was opulent but somber with heavy curtains drawn against the city. Mikhail Vulov was already there. He was a man in his late 60s with a bulldog's build and eyes that seemed to hold the cold wisdom of a Siberian winter. He was flanked by two stern-faced lawyers. Victoria Sterling was also present, a move that surprised even Ronald. She had leveraged her position as a rival bidder to be included as an observer, a courtesy extended by the board. She sat on a couch at the side of the room, a silent, venomous presence, her eyes fixed on Elena. Her expression was a mixture of shock and fury. Seeing Elena walking in beside Ronald, not as a servant, but as an equal, was a clear sign that her plan had backfired spectacularly. Elena felt Victoria's hateful gaze but refused to acknowledge it. Her focus was entirely on Vulov. She met his shrewd gaze with a calm, steady one of her own. She was no longer a waitress hiding from her past. Dressed in a simple but elegant dark gray suit, she was Elena Vance, a professional at the top of her game. The initial pleasantries were exchanged in English. Then, as Elena had predicted, Vulov switched to Russian. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice a low rumble, "before we speak of assets and liabilities, tell me a story. Tell me about the time you failed. Not a small failure, a catastrophic one. I wish to know the character of the man I am dealing with when his back is against the wall." It was a classic Volkov test. Ronald paused, and for a heart-topping moment, Elena saw a flicker of the old arrogance. But then he glanced at her, and she gave him the slightest of nods. He took a breath and began to speak not of a business deal gone wrong, but of a personal failure from his early 20s. A startup with friends that had collapsed due to his own hubris, costing him both his friendships and his savings. He spoke honestly without excuses. Elena translated his story flawlessly, capturing the tone of regret and learned humility. She could feel Volkov's attention sharpen. This was not the answer he had expected from the ruthless American billionaire. The negotiation continued for hours. Volkov veered from financial specifics to philosophical discussions, quoting Russian poets and referencing historical events. Each time Elena was ready. When Vulov quoted a line from Pushkin about the nature of fate, Elena not only translated it, but provided the context of the poem, subtly connecting its theme of choice versus destiny to the business decision before them. Vulov's eyes lit up with appreciation. He was dueling, and for the first time, he had found a worthy opponent. The moment of truth finally came. Vulov leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Elena's. "You have a familiar face, Miss Vance," he said in Russian, his voice dangerously soft. "Jean, the peace talks. I remember you. You were the translator, the one who broke." The room went cold. Victoria Sterling leaned forward, a triumphant, cruel smile spreading across her face. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment Elena would be exposed and humiliated. Elena met Vulov's gaze without flinching. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady. "I was there, Mr. Vulov, and I remember you. I remember the threats that were made against Ambassador Sterling's family, spoken in a dialect designed to be missed. The threats you advised your minister to make." Volkov's expression hardened. Victoria's smile faltered. "It was not I who broke, sir." Elena continued, her voice resonating with 5 years of suppressed truth. "It was the protocol that broke. I was faced with an impossible choice to translate a direct threat that would have ended negotiations immediately or to rephrase it in a way that preserved a sliver of hope for peace. I chose hope. It was a mistake I have lived with every day since. But it was a mistake born of a desire for peace, not a failure of skill or nerve." She then turned her gaze to Victoria, switching to perfect English so everyone could understand. "Your father, Monsieur Sterling, was a great man who was put in an impossible position by men who would rather see the world burn than compromise. My action did not ruin him. Their hatred did. Silence thick, heavy, and absolute." Elena had done more than defend herself. She had seized control of the narrative. She had turned Vulov's accusation back on him, exposing his own role in the collapse of the talks. Volkov stared at her for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, grudging respect dawned in his eyes. He had tested her, and she had passed in a way he could never have anticipated. He appreciated strength above all else, and this woman possessed it in abundance. He turned to Ronald. "You chose your counsel well, Mr. Thorne," he said in Russian. He then switched to English. "You have the deal. My lawyers will be in touch with yours to finalize the terms." He stood, gave a curt nod to Ronald, and a final long look at Elena, and then swept out of the room with his entourage. It was over. Victoria Sterling was left sitting on the couch, her face a mask of pure, undiluted fury. She had lost. She stood up, gave Elena a look of utter hatred, and stormed out without a word. In the silent room, Ronald turned to Elena. The magnitude of what she had just accomplished was staggering. She had faced down her past, saved his multi-billion-dollar deal, and exposed his rival in one fell swoop. "Elena," he began, his voice filled with an emotion she had never heard from him before. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied, a small, genuine smile, finally gracing her lips. For the first time in 5 years, she felt light. The immense weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. "That's not true," Ronald said, stepping closer. "I do have something to say. That night at the restaurant, I was an arrogant fool. I judged you without knowing you, and I was wrong. Completely and utterly wrong." He looked at her, his icy blue eyes now warm with sincerity. "I am not offering you a job as a translator. I'm offering you a position as Executive Vice President of Global Strategy for Titan Industries. I don't need someone to tell me what other people are saying. I need someone to tell me what I need to hear. I need you." Elena looked at him at the genuine offer in his eyes. This wasn't a reward. It was a recognition of her true worth. Her exile was over. She had walked through the fire of her past and emerged stronger. She was no longer a ghost hiding in the shadows. She was Elena Vance, and her story was just beginning. "I accept." She said this story began with a single arrogant phrase. Translate this. It was meant to humiliate, to put a quiet waitress in her place, but it ended up elevating her, revealing a hidden strength forged in a painful past. Elena's journey teaches us that we should never judge a person by their uniform or their job title. True worth isn't about wealth or status. It's about integrity, resilience, and the courage to face your own history. She didn't just translate words, she translated her poem into power. Her story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the quietest people have the most powerful voices. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of hidden heroes and unexpected triumphs. Let us know in the comments what you think of Elena's incredible journey.